Welcome to Cordell and Cordell's Men's Divorce Podcast, bringing you information for guys before, during, and after divorce, and everything related to family law. This podcast is not to be taken as legal advice, and no attorney-client relationship is established.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Men's Divorce Podcast. I am Kristin Zurek. I am the Senior Litigation Partner in our St. Louis office. And today we have Matt Rudo, our lead litigator from Baltimore, joining us today. Matt, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Good morning, Kristin.
Thanks for joining us today. I want to talk a little bit. I brought you on to talk about getting everybody ready to prepare for separation. I think it's really important that people have some understanding as to how to organize their lives to take this first step to file. Tell me if you agree with that.
I couldn't agree more. Preparation is the key to something like this.
So tell me, Matt, from your perspective as a lead litigator, what do you think the first step is to get yourself ready to prepare for separation?
I think it's doing your research. It's important to know what's in front of you and to try to be a step ahead at least as much as you possibly can. If it's gotten to the point where your wife has filed for a divorce or where she has even began planning for it with her attorney, you're already a step behind the curve. A lot of times there's writing on the wall. You can see it coming. Don't ignore it. Take it. Take the positive steps so that you're ready when it happens.
What is a good hint for someone to feel like the writing's on the wall, or to feel like his or her spouse has taken the steps to already talk to a lawyer?
A lot of times it's very obvious. Sometimes your spouse will start saying, "I want a divorce," something very simple like that. Sometimes you might see things that are a little bit less obvious, where there's just some kind of hint that your spouse isn't happy. Maybe they aren't around as much. Maybe you can't explain their whereabouts. Maybe that you've heard them talking secretively. If things aren't going well, then these puzzle pieces can be put together, and to know that something's going on, and that's your key to get prepared.
All right. So what do you think the first step after starting your research is?
So after you do your research and you know what's in front of you, or at least you think you know what's in front of you, I believe after that, the next step, the best thing to do is to have a consultation with an attorney, an experienced family law attorney who can provide you with direction, who can provide you with the law and with the procedure in your jurisdiction and in your state, so that that what you're doing is the right thing. Sometimes it's not quite as obvious online. Sometimes it's very generic, but getting that specific advice from somebody who knows what they're doing is invaluable.
So how do I tell a client, or how should a client be aware of the kinds of questions they should have together before they walk in to see a divorce attorney?
Really, it's your list of priorities, your list of concerns. Think through the situation. What's going to be important to you? Custody of your children, if you have children, if there's minor children involved, the finances, the residential situation, whatever it may be, whatever is important to you. Make sure that you know the topics that are important, and make sure you know the specific issues of each topic that are important. Have a list ready to go so that you're efficient, so that you use your time wisely with your attorney, with your consultation attorney at the very least. Just even by doing a little bit of background research before you sit down with the attorney and having some kind of idea about how things are going can be helpful in just facilitating a conversation that's helpful for you.
Do you have any hints on how to find a good attorney online for people?
Going to the Cordell and Cordell website would be certainly a recommendation. But generally speaking, you're going to be looking for somebody with experience. You just don't want somebody that has family law experience. You want somebody that has significant family law experience. You want somebody who holds the same values that you do. Going through these websites, it might not take 5 minutes. You might have to do a little bit more lengthy research to narrow down your choices. Visit with the attorneys who you think are appropriate for you.
That's really, really good advice. So one of the things I know when I meet with people that are contemplating separation, the first question anybody always asks me is, do I need to move out of the house, or should I have to move out of the house? What advice do you typically give when someone asks you that question?
So generally speaking, it's usually not a great idea to move out of the house. There's several reasons for that that we could always discuss in great detail. But every situation is a little bit different. So, what's good for the goose is not always good for the gander. Another reason why having a consultation with somebody who understands the issues that are in front of you was a good idea. But generally, moving out of the house can lead to a separation, not just from your spouse, but from your children. And it's something to get out in front of, I guess, is probably the way to put it. If you do feel like you need to move out, and there are times where it can be appropriate, there are several of them, there are things to consider. Things to consider include, if you have children, where you're moving, is it a safe environment for them? Is there space enough for them? Is it reasonably close to your spouse where exchanges won't be a problem? These are all things that need to be considered along with other issues as well. But having a plan in place is important, not just for the home itself, but also just for the general plan with your schedule, knowing that your children are going to be covered, that you can make sure you can get them to school and the other places where they need to be. Those are all considerations that need to be considered before you go and move anywhere.
I always tell clients at this time that they need to sort of round up their village. They need to find friends and family and people that can help them set up their own new place or set up their support network if we can't count on the other parent while the case is pending, especially if litigation is pretty contested. Is that fair?
I think it is. It's hard for anybody to do it on their own. It's always nice to have a support system and as much help as you can have.
The next thing I know that people are really stressed out about and trying to decide when to separate is what's going to happen with my money. How do I deal with my finances moving from a 2-income household to a 1-income household? What advice do you usually give to potential clients who are worried about that?
It's a stressful thing for sure. Ways to protect yourself would include assuming that you have a joint bank account with your spouse, opening up your own bank account, having your direct deposit go to that bank account instead of into the joint account where your spouse has immediate access to it. If there's any savings, there could be a need to move some of those savings over. Again, that's a case-by-case basis. It's something to discuss, but it's money that's out there. You're going to want to protect it. Credit card accounts. Sometimes you might have a credit card account where your spouse is an authorized user, or perhaps even a joint account, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that she's not using credit that can come back to only be your responsibility. So removing her from your credit card accounts or as an authorized user from your credit card accounts can be extremely helpful and save you an extraordinary amount of money and aggravation.
Matt, are there local orders? I know there's orders in my jurisdiction that tell us we're not supposed to do that stuff in anticipation of divorce. Is that something they should run through with their counsel?
So absolutely, because I will tell you that in Maryland, we do not have those same restrictions as they do in some other states. And that's another reason, just like you said, Kristin, why it's important to consult with counsel, because what might work in one state or even county or even smaller jurisdiction might not work in another. So it's the specific advice that you can get from somebody who deals with it on a day-to-day basis that becomes invaluable. But if these things can be done, if they can be done without hurting your interest, then they can be cost-saving measures.
That's a very good point. Now, what happens if if the moneyed spouse is meeting with you and you have a non-working or a non-moneyed spouse at home, and that person is relying on the person in front of you to help pay their bills? How do you handle that situation right at the get-go?
So there's something to be said. It's very important not to leave your spouse high and dry, because the way that's going to reflect on you when you do walk into the courtroom would not be good. You want to avoid those kind of things in general. So making sure that they have enough money to support themselves. And we're not talking about extravagant, purchases, but in order to ensure that they have the at least essentials. They can put a roof over their head, food in their mouth, that they can take care of the children when they have them. These kind of things. Just generally kind of maintaining to the largest extent possible the status quo that existed prior to the separation usually shows well once you walk into a courtroom. At the same time, you don't want to overfund your spouse because you can set a precedent that would be against your interests. So again, working with counsel, going through these things, making sure that you're hitting the sweet spot with the amount that you are providing is an important consideration.
Do you find in your litigation taking those steps in the first place to try to ensure money is flowing minimizes the need to run to court and get temporary orders?
Very much so. And also results in a significant cost savings, because if you do need to have temporary hearings to make decisions on these kind of things, the preparation and the court time can be expensive, but you can avoid it with some simple proactive measures.
Advanced planning goes a long way sometimes, doesn't it?
Exactly.
So how about just the little day-to-day things? Should a potential new client kick her off the car insurance or kick her off health insurance or stop paying for her cell phone plan as punishment for having to file for divorce?
Generally speaking, no. Those are also considerations that go very much in line with what we were just talking about as far as a dependent spouse goes. If they don't have the ability to do these things, to pay for these things on their own, then your continued support with them becomes important, and important in the eyes of the court. Certainly, I know in Maryland, I'm sure it's similar in other jurisdictions. But one of the last things they ever want to see anybody do is remove a spouse or the rest of their family from the health insurance plan. It's an extremely bad look, and especially if the other spouse doesn't have any notice or any opportunity to get coverage through their own employer, it can be even worse. Things like cell phone bills or car insurance might not carry the same kind of weight, but they are sort of similar, and those are the kind of things to consider on a case-by-case basis. Those are the kind of things that you discuss with your counsel, and if you're going to move forward with anything like that, it typically is going to need to be with some advanced notification to again make sure that your hands are clean when you walk into a courtroom.
That's really good advice. I always tell my clients that we have to plan to look like the more reasonable party, because if you come in and position yourself to be the more reasonable party, suddenly the judge is a little bit more in your favor than the other side. So I appreciate where you're coming from on that. Do you agree with that?
100%. There's a lot of brownie points involved in being the more reasonable person in the courtroom.
Wonderful. Now we're talking about stress. We've talked about the financial stress, but what about just the pure emotional stress of going through this? I mean, you might realize that you're there and this needs to happen, but wow, you're going to be apart from your kids. Your marriage is breaking down. You sort of have to change your life here. How do you advise a client to deal with that?
Right. So, as counsel, that's not what we're equipped to do, really. So the advice is generally to talk to somebody who is equipped to do that, a therapist, a mental health professional of some kind, somebody that you can rely on, that you can consult with. In Maryland, and I believe in most other jurisdictions, you have a privilege with that provider. In most situations, that privilege is going to be very, very hard to break. So you do have somebody, generally speaking, who you can talk to in confidence, and who you can help you work through these things from the emotional angle. There's very few people who aren't affected emotionally by this situation. It's a very significant point in time.
What if people are worried that it's going to be used against them in court? Have you ever had a client who sought counseling have that be used against them in court in any way?
I've never seen it. Anything is possible, I assume, but that's not the expectation. And certainly, if somebody is just going through a difficult time because they're getting divorced and looking for somebody to talk through them, that's going to be respected by most judges and courts out there.
I've also seen clients be worried about, most people present with some level of anxiety or depression because of all of the life changes that are happening. I see clients sometimes very worried about going to their doctor and getting a prescription for anxiety or depression meds to help them deal with what's going on because they're worried about how that's going to look. Can you speak to that at all?
Right. So again, it would be covered by the same privilege that your conversations with the therapist or mental health professional would be covered by. So there shouldn't be any concerns that would be above or beyond the concerns that you would have about talking to somebody.
Wonderful. I appreciate that. I appreciate your advice in bringing this to the table, Matt. You're giving everybody a good perspective of how to take some steps to not only deal with themselves, their kids, their finances, and their mental health before we actually set foot in a courtroom. Is there any other advice you want to give folks before we finish up today?
It's been my pleasure. I guess the only thing left to say is that this is by no means an exhaustive list. There is a significant amount of information to go over and to consider, and it just makes it even more important to visit with a respected professional who can help you through these issues.
Thank you, Matt, for your time and your expertise today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I want to remind everybody that there are plenty of resources online at CordellCordell.com and at mensdivorce.com about different topics related to divorce to give you all a little bit further information to take the steps forward. Thank you for your time and good luck to you.